The following is a CUNY TV special presentation.
I now also want to bring to the stage a gentleman who I think everybody in this room knows and throughout the city, Police Commissioner Bill Bratton. Bill, can you come on up and join me? And also, I also want to acknowledge the new commissioner coming in a week from now, I believe, and you don't recognize him because he's wearing his civvies, Jimmy O'Neill, and we wish you the best of luck. Bill, ABNY wanted to thank you for all the things you've done to this city, with us, and so many other New Yorkers, and making this the greatest place to live, work, and visit. We are so have been so honored to have you with us at so many important times with our city, from your original being the police first head of the transit. And then for Mayor Dinkins, am I correct? And then taking the baton from his Safe Streets, Safe City initiative, and really coming up with the plan to reduce crime in the 90s. And then when you returned in 2014, your vision and leadership has helped improve the quality of life for all New Yorkers. And we continue to see crime go to historic lows. So we just want to give you a little token of appreciation for all the things you've done for our city, and we wish you and Ricky the best of luck as you move into the private sector, and I'm sure we will see from you, hear from you, and look forward to working with you. So Bill, thank you.
Billy, thank you so much. This organization, ABNY, is one I was first exposed to in 1990. Met his uncle Jack at the old Brasserie restaurant, and Jack became a very good friend. Then through Jack met Lou, Billy's father. Extraordinary family, extraordinary organization that has done so much for the city. There's a confluence of interests here this morning. Carl being honored, that Carl, a good friend and a colleague over the last year or so, we worked very closely on the Times Square issues that was so much in the news a year or so ago. Good news is we're finally coming to completion on a lot of the construction in the Times Square project. I have a secondary role here this morning. In a few moments, I'm going to introduce you to several officers who were very involved in an incident in Times Square during the month of July. Being at the same table with David Dinkins during this period of time of the U.S. Open bring back memories of 1990, newly appointed Chief of Transit Police, a very desperate situation in the subway at that time, very tough situation in the city at that time. Mayor Dinkins had just been elected, and during the U.S. Open, which he fought so hard to keep in New York City and grow in New York City to the extent that it is one of the biggest economic drivers in this city today. Back in 1990, we had the tragic death of Brian Watkins in the subway on a Sunday afternoon, him and his family on the way to that U.S. Open. That death, however, was the catalyst for the turnaround of New York City. Out of that tragedy came opportunity. Within 2 days, Governor Cuomo gave to the transit police $40 million to begin the reinvigoration of that organization that began the turnaround in the subway. Subsequent to that, Mayor Dinkins was able to get the Safe Streets Act passed up in Albany that allowed for the hiring of 6,000 additional New York City police officers. In 1994, when I was appointed police commissioner by then Mayor Giuliani, it was the idea to take the successes that we had in the subway, particularly dealing with quality of life, broken windows, enforcement, and bring them into the streets. With those 6,000 officers from the previous administration, the miracle of the turnaround of the crime situation began in New York City, to the extent that just 2 days ago, the mayor and I reported that we had the safest summer in the history of this city, the modern history in terms of crime. So it's a real pleasure to be here today at the table with Mayor Dinkins, to be here as you honor Carl for all that he has done with the revitalization of so much of the infrastructure of the city, the economic vitality of it. But I have a secondary role that Bill has asked me to participate in, and I'd like to ask my successor to be, I guess the term would be Commissioner Designate, Jimmy O'Neill, to join me on stage, and I'd like to bring up two of the police officers that Jimmy and I are so privileged to work with and to serve with, and I'm going to introduce you to Sergeant Armani and Police Officer Zabalski, who, if they'll just join us on the stage for just one moment, who are coming up onto the stage. As they come up onto the stage, on September 16th, I will finish my time as police commissioner for the second time. Like my predecessor, Ray Kelly, we're both blessed to twice serve this great city, this extraordinary city. On the 16th, I will be retiring. Jimmy O'Neill will be sworn in the private ceremony. Then on the 19th, he will officially be sworn in as the next police commissioner for the city of New York. His privilege, like my privilege, will be to lead the 50-some-odd thousand members of this department that serve this city, your NYPD. The two officers on the stage here, Bill has asked that he invited them here to acknowledge their contribution to the city, and it exemplifies the contribution that's being made every day by 36,000 officers. When officers come to work, they never quite know what the day is going to bring, but they try to prepare themselves for any eventuality. Nobody could ever prepare these two officers for the eventuality and the incident they faced in July of this past summer. Assigned to Times Square as part of the extra cordon of officers that we now have in that square on a daily basis, they were sitting in their police car, middle of Times Square, when a gentleman rode by in a car and threw a device into their vehicle. The officers immediately picked up the device, saw that it appeared to be an active bomb. It was blinking. The officers, instead of fleeing their car, which most people would be able to do, instead, they drove that vehicle out of Times Square with that device in their lap to get that vehicle and what they thought to be an active bomb out of Times Square onto an adjacent side street, where it was determined that the device was not a bomb, was inactive, but had all the makings of one. We ended up with a 3-hour standoff down the street with the suspect in that matter, believing he had devices in his car. So this morning, Billy wanted us to be in a position to, before you, acknowledge just two members of this department who, like the other 36,000, every day come to work never knowing quite what to expect. But they did what we do expect of every New York City police officer. They performed heroically. They sought to save lives at the potential expense of their own. So I just wanted to be here with the new Chief Police Commissioner Designate and with this great organization, ABNY, which Billy is now proud to be leading, to say in front of all you, thank you to these two officers for what they did.
This year, we celebrate the 100th anniversary of zoning, the zoning code of the City of New York, which has resulted in our iconic skyline. Zoning continues to deeply impact the ongoing legacy of our city as we work to control density, foster growth, expand our city's limits, and increase the quality of life. As I mentioned, Carl's a dedicated public servant, and his, as I mentioned before, his fingerprints are all over the city, and particularly, we talked about Times Square, overseeing the rezoning of Hudson Square, and as the first president of the Downtown Alliance that I mentioned before. I've worked personally with Carl for over 25 years. Yes, we started in high school, and there are so many endeavors that we've worked conjunctly with at ABNY and with all the other areas that he's been involved in. So it is now my pleasure to introduce the Chairman of the City Planning Commission, Carl Weisbrod, who will share his vision of the future of zoning in the City of New York.
So I admit I'm still a little stunned to be up here rather than in the audience with you, listening to somebody else talking. I truly thought my government career was over a long time ago, but the opportunity to work at city planning and to help guide the most exciting city on earth for generations to come just proved overwhelmingly seductive. Planning for The future of New York is more important today than ever. More and more people are voting for urban life. It is where the jobs are. It provides communities for families, culture, and a dynamic lifestyle for those of all ages. And its density is the catalyst for its vitality. And that's something we shouldn't forget. The role of city government is crucial to this, but it's really most effective when it operates in partnership with civic organizations like ABNY and with so many of you in this room. So let me start by taking a look backward. I've had the great privilege of serving 5 different mayors. First under Mayor John Lindsay. In the last 60 years and in the late 60s and early 70s, Mayor Lindsay was really a lonely voice pleading for our national government to pay attention to the pressing needs of cities. But the federal government, for the most part, did not step up, and the dramatic social changes of the times put enormous burdens on government. They added to the significant erosion of basic services, the 1970s fiscal crisis, and a sharp decline in our population. Some of you may remember the city even considered implementing a policy of planned shrinkage, that is to retreat from crime-ridden neighborhoods stricken by abandonment, to focus principally on saving the central business districts, and to build defensively. And some of the worst architecture we live with today was designed to wall off those inside from disagreeable aspects of urban life on the outside. And I'm always reminded of my former boss, Ed Koch, when he was campaigning for mayor in 1977, and an elderly woman in Brighton Beach tugged on his shirt and said, Mr. Koch, make the city what it once was. And he responded, lady, it was never that good. But even with less than robust federal investment in the years since, and the 10% population losses in the 1970s, our city, in no small measure, thanks to the leadership of ABNY and successive mayoral administrations, rose to the challenge and avoided the collapse that befell many older cities in the East and Midwest. We did it by tapping into our core values: diversity, entrepreneurial spirit, innovation, respect for talent, and commitment to social justice. And now we are the envy of the world. We're the gold standard. And we will not waver in ensuring our continued status as the world's preeminent global city. In 2000, New York reached an official population of 8 million for the first time, formed on the heels of immigration flows that brought in an unprecedented mix of ethnicities. Now, with our continuing incredible growth, we face some complex planning challenges once again. Our current growth is reminiscent of the city's last period of substantial expansion at the turn of the 20th century. Think about this. 100 years ago, the city welcomed several million immigrants. Our population rose from 3.4 million in 1900, right after consolidation, to 6.9 million in 1930. As Manhattan peaked at 1910 at over 2.3 million people, the city looked at ways to disperse its population. We built the bulk of the intense infrastructure we have today: our subways, our bridges, our tunnels, and lots of housing. The pioneering 1916 zoning resolution, celebrating its 100th anniversary this year, was a groundbreaking tool for guiding the city's urban footprint that expanded between the end of World War I and the Great Depression, and then again after World War II into the 1960s, all the while maintaining our underlying ethos, our willingness to welcome people from all over and embrace growth. Yet, the growth of today is quite different from that of the 1920s. Let's talk a little bit about what's happening with our population, our economy, housing and infrastructure, and 3 big questions that I believe we as a city must answer. First, how do we give everyone a fair shot at opportunity and housing in this new economy? Second, how do we make technology work for us and not against us, especially when it comes to solving urgent challenges like stress on our infrastructure? And finally, how can we make our politics reflect what's best in us and not what's worst? I believe we have made some progress, which I'll talk about in a moment, but we can't rest on our laurels just yet, and we must continue to think anew and act anew to find the right answers. So let me start with people. The city's population right now is at 8.55 million, the largest in history. Our growth is due to both positive natural increase, that is, residents are living longer, wanting to stay here, and they want to raise their families here, and positive net migration, that is, people from all over want to come here. We added more than 375,000 people since 2010 alone, which is like absorbing the city of Tampa. And as in the 1920s, the most significant growth is in the outer boroughs. In the last 5 years, Brooklyn saw the largest increase, 132,000 people, followed by Queens, the Bronx, Manhattan, and Staten Island. Queens and Staten Island are now at their population highs, although Staten Island's growth has slowed dramatically. The Bronx is very close to its historical 1970 high of 1.5 million. Interestingly, although Manhattan is growing, its population is still more than 680,000 below its 1910 peak, a point we often forget when we hear about overdevelopment. The biggest difference between the 1920s and today is that 100 years ago, it was possible to grow by building on farmland in Brooklyn and Queens and the Bronx. Today, we are growing in a mature city, full of established neighborhoods with little vacant land. And this is central to understanding our current challenges. Another basic fact, the city's aging, although not as fast as the rest of the country. Nationally, the number of people 65 and over is expected to double to 82 million by 2040. The city's senior population is projected to grow by 41%, or an additional 400,000 people, to a total of 1.4 million by 2040. However, although we certainly have to plan for our growing senior population, speaking as a senior, as I'll discuss in a moment, we will remain relatively youthful compared to other major urban centers. Since 1970, New York City's share of immigrants has doubled. More than 3.1 million, or 37% of our 8.5 million residents are foreign-born, and about 40% of those arrived here in 2000 or later. 1/2 of all New Yorkers now speak a language other than English at home. Most notably, our Asian and Hispanic populations have dramatically increased, accounting for more than 80% of the city's population growth, and over half of Brooklyn's in the last 5 years. We now have over 2.4 million Hispanics, more than any other city in the United States, and we're home to the largest Chinese population outside of Asia. Immigrants play a key role in the city's overall labor force. Nearly half of all employed residents are foreign-born, and that's similar across most age groups and a range of industries. We attract the best and the brightest from around the country. People moving here have a higher educational attainment than those moving out. Young domestic migrants and immigrants are helping populate our labor force and fuel our economy, the kind of growth and opportunity that the city was starved for in the 1970s. The city now has the most dominant, diverse urban economy in the world. More than 4.3 million jobs, an all-time high. More than 250,000 jobs have been added since Mayor de Blasio took office, and we're in the midst of the fastest 2-year growth on record and the largest streak of private sector job creation over any 5-year period since at least the 1980s and probably in history. The 500,000 jobs added in the last 5 years equals almost half the total private employment in Chicago. Think about that. We also outpaced the nation. If you compare the third quarters of 2010 and 2015, New York City private sector jobs have increased by 15.2% compared to 11.2% nationally. The city's economy continues to diversify, with our top 3 growing sectors largely mirroring population growth, as well as a shift toward new typologies of office-based employment. And all the boroughs are benefiting. Absolute job gains were heavily concentrated in Midtown and Lower Manhattan, which absorbed almost half of all gains between 2010 and 2014. But the rate of growth is faster outside of Manhattan, like in North Brooklyn and Western Queens. Office space typically was about 250 to 300 square feet per person. Now for many industries, it's closer to 180 square feet per person. Over half of renter households, which make up 2/3 of all households in the city, pay more than 1/3 of their income on rent. We need more housing generally. Now, as last week's New York Times noted, as the supply of market rate housing has grown in downtown Brooklyn, market prices are actually coming down. The laws of supply and demand are still relevant. That's good, and this relief in Brooklyn market prices, I think, will ultimately ripple through to other neighborhoods as well. But land costs and construction costs put new housing out of reach for most. Tax reductions, direct capital subsidies, cross-subsidies for market rate housing, and rezonings that can reduce land costs and increase potential capacity are required, often in combination to create affordable housing. Meanwhile, Mayor de Blasio's housing plan, the most ambitious and progressive in the nation, is on budget and ahead of schedule at the 2-year mark, with over 53,000 affordable housing units financed so far. This means enough homes for 130,000 New Yorkers. In no small measure, this is due to the mayor doubling the 10-year capital funding for housing, and I must say we would be even further along if we had an adequate successor to 421A, which expired last year. Nevertheless, more new affordable housing is now underway in any year than since HPD was founded in 1976, and more preserved housing in any year since Ed Koch was mayor. And I have to give a shout out to Vicki Bean, the amazing housing commissioner who really made this happen. New zoning tools are also an important part of the program to ensure the public and private sector work well together. The underlying foundation of MIH is more economically diverse neighborhoods. That's the basis of it. We are still too segregated by income. The evidence is compelling that poor children who grow up in economically diverse neighborhoods tend to do better. We now have close to 2,000 MIH units in our pipeline, and a major one, La Centrale in the Bronx, was just approved by the City Council yesterday. ZQA has made it less expensive to build affordable and senior housing, in part by eliminating unnecessary parking requirements. It offers more options to seniors. It will enhance quality of life in our distinct neighborhoods with better ground floor retail spaces and more inviting courtyards. It will be possible to build continuing care retirement communities, of which we have none in the city of New York right now, and CCRCs allow lifelong partners to stay together even though they age at different paces. Yet despite this critical demand for housing, large sections of Manhattan, the Bronx, and Brooklyn are still below their 1970s density. And there are other areas where new housing can build on the qualities of existing communities. That's why we're conducting planning studies in a variety of neighborhoods in all 5 boroughs. And the first one we've rezoned is Brooklyn's East New York, where there is a capacity for growth, because today's population is nearly 20,000 or 1/3 below its historic high of 66,000 in 1950. Moreover, it is the first neighborhood where MIH applies. Whether we are addressing housing needs in East New York, or Washington Heights, or Long Island City, or Greenwich Village, MIH assures a guaranteed amount of affordable housing to go along with market rate development so that over time, neighborhoods can reflect more of the economic diversity that sociological evidence makes clear is important. But our plan for East New York goes far beyond zoning. The mayor has created a $1 billion neighborhood development fund exclusively for neighborhoods where we are undertaking comprehensive growth-oriented plans. East New York was the first to tap into this fund. That means more than $250 million for that community, for a new school, a community center for youth, better open space and parks, a rebuilt Atlantic Avenue, and an enhanced industrial business zone to foster new jobs. Thanks to the Bloomberg administration, the development of Hudson Yards is well underway. And as Bill mentioned, at the 15th anniversary of 9/11, the World Trade Center is almost complete. Last year's passage of the Vanderbilt Corridor Text amendment permitted more modern commercial space in the immediate vicinity of Grand Central Terminal while guaranteeing major improvements to its critical subway complex. And last week, we issued a scoping notice for Greater Midtown. That proposal, which will enter the public review process before year end, would permit greater as-of-right bulk in return for dramatic public realm improvements, major transit improvements, historic preservation. We have an obligation to protect and, where possible, expand our manufacturing and industrial sectors. These jobs, recently stabilizing after decades of decline, are an important support to other sectors and to assuring continued economic diversity. Proactively promoting commercial office uses, as well as the creation of a special permit for hotels and regulating self-storage in our industrial business zones, will further protect our industrial areas. Subway ridership is at its highest since 1948, particularly during off-peak hours. Even the very definition of peak hours has changed as the standard 9-to-5 work day has evolved. Simply keeping the city's infrastructure and public facilities in a state of good repair requires sustained investment. But we also have to invest in growth. And city planning has now created a new partnership with the Office of Management and Budget to better align the city's 10-year capital planning process in order to link infrastructure investments more closely to growth. We're especially focused on opportunities and welcome projects for the developers in the room that propose to bring jobs closer to where people live and housing closer to where jobs are. So to conclude, I'd just like to circle back to today's demographic trends. You know, the success of any great city lies in its capacity to reinvent itself over time, to transition. The energy unleashed by the huge and continuous ebb and flow of people fuels our success. The population dynamic that characterizes the borough I was raised in, Queens, shows an astounding capacity to embrace change. In a way, that leads to an almost constant replenishment of neighborhoods. New York City is arguably the most multiracial and multi-ethnic than at any time in our history. This demographic ballet is without a doubt a source of strength for the city. But identifying transitions in a city where transitions have become the norm is a challenge by any measure, given their number and complexity. When transition is used, it implies that neighborhoods are moving from one state to another, a temporal movement from one condition to another. But what if communities are continuously evolving, where the equilibrium that is established is based on change that is the norm? Finding the appropriate equilibrium requires government as well as civic institutions to take a broad and inclusive look at a view of the city's needs and to resist, I think, parochial temptations. Our values of embracing diversity, welcoming entrepreneurial spirit, benefiting from the sparks of innovation and creativity that result from density, are what attracts people to New York and what keeps most of us here. I look forward to working with all of you in these very challenging times and embracing what is so great about our city. So thank you.
Thank you all for coming. Carl, thank you again for everything you do.